Hey everybody, and welcome to a Planet Coaster video. So I just recently finished another park in Planet Coaster, and I've been noticing a reoccurring theme with each one that I do. When the park is all said and done, the frame rate of the game is complete butthole. I'm talking a max of 30 FPS when a brand new sandbox map will be around 130. For this video, I decided to set out and find out what exactly is the biggest contributor in tanking the game's performance. First thing we'll look at is scenery, then flat rides and coasters, and finally guests. The main purpose of this is I'm about to start a brand new series in Planet Coaster, and I want to know just exactly how much crap I can have in that park so the frame rate doesn't drop below 60 FPS. Before starting, I should point out that all this is being done on a fresh sandbox map. I am playing with the medium preset for graphics because I feel like a majority of the players need to play on those settings to get the game just to run, even though my computer specs are better than the ones recommended on the Steam store page. With all these settings, on a fresh sandbox map, I get around 130 FPS without moving the camera and 80 to 90 FPS while moving around pretty fast. Disclaimer: I am not an expert at video game graphics settings or game programming. There's probably better ways of doing this, but for my own purposes, this will work. There you go. You can delete your mean comment saying, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm well aware I have no idea what I'm doing. On to the first test, scenery. The main thought process behind this was bigger scenery pieces would cause the game to lag more than smaller scenery pieces, because, there's just more to load in. The plan was to use cubes to test this. First, I'd place a billion small cubes, see how many small cubes it would take to start to notice a reasonable dip in the frame rate. Then, I would replace all those small cubes with the same number of medium cubes to see if that would change, and then large cubes. If the size of the object impacts the frame rate, then the game would have less frames with the bigger cubes than the small cubes. Simple. At the same time, this was also testing how many objects the game could handle in general. So I started placing tiny cubes. 10, 100, 1000, and guess what? No change in performance at all. The more of these tiny cubes I placed, I started to notice that a bunch would disappear if I started to move too far away from them. This didn't really matter though, because with them on the screen, without them on the screen, frames didn't change at all. Everything was running smoothly. After around 21,000, I decided to call it quits. Flying through them may have melted my brain. Oh god, my eyes. But despite that, the frame rate was still fine. With the results of the first test, I said screw the medium cubes and went right for the big boys. After placing 1,600 large cubes, then doubling it to 3,200 with no change, I decided just to fill up the whole damn park with the cubes. With over 37,000 large cubes placed, frame rate dropped from 130 down to 120 standing still. 37,000 cubes, and the frame rate was still double the 60 FPS minimum I was aiming for. With this, I'm starting to believe that scenery doesn't contribute much to lag in bigger parks. Now you might be saying, cubes are great and all, but they have one color and 6 sides, so there really isn't much detail to render. I thought the same exact thing, so I did the same exact test, but with trees. Most parks have a lot of them, and they're heavily detailed, so let's see what they do to the game when there's thousands of them. It took 13,000 trees to hit 90 FPS standing still, and to hit 60 FPS while flying through them all. That's a lot of trees. I'm not saying people don't make parks with more trees than that, but I feel most parks would have less than 13,000 trees, and they still have the lag problem, so it's likely not the trees. Now, you might be saying, trees are great and all, but that's just one piece of scenery. What about buildings with a lot of detail using a lot of smaller pieces of scenery? Well, I thought the same thing, so I did the same exact test, but with buildings. I picked a pre-made one that was just over 500 pieces and started placing them everywhere. Kind of annoying having to place them one at a time because you can't copy and paste multiple buildings for some stupid reason, but I did it in the name of science. I got bored after placing 80 of them. That's over 40,000 scenery pieces. Again, like the trees, staring at all those buildings, I was at 90 FPS and close to 70 when moving the screen around them. The last thing I wanted to see with the scenery was, what if all those pieces were condensed into one building? So I did just that. All 80 of the same building stacked on top of each other, all 40,000 pieces. And the results actually surprised me. Alright, so it may not look like it, but right now, there is 80 of that building piled up there. And we have worse frame rate than we did when they were all spread out. Right now, we're at low 50s, moving around it, and then just staring at it. We're at mid 60s. And just to prove to you that there is 80 buildings there. There you go. 80 buildings, 40,000 pieces. That's surprising. You would think having them all spread out, taking up more space, casting more shadows, would cause way more strain on performance than just having them all stacked up here. But no, it's flying into it. We're down in the 20s. What if we're not looking at it? Oh yeah, if we're not looking at it, we're back up to good frame rate. We're right back to 90. Standing still 130. The second that thing gets into our view, it tanks. So the closer you are to it, the more it hurts performance. That's literally it. The closer you get, the worse it gets. You can see it as we move in here. Here we go. 60. 50. 40. 30. 20. 10. And then the second we get out on the other side, it just jumps right back up again. I think what was most surprising was the fact that having all those buildings spread out performed better than all of them in a stack. In Planet Coaster, the further away you are from objects, the less detail they have, so more things can be present on the screen without the game imploding. But even at the same distance, you would think having all those buildings spread out, that all those individual sections of the park had things in them being rendered, casting shadows. I would assume that that is what would cause, more performance issues than having everything stacked into one spot, all casting just one shadow. I don't know. Me personally, I would think that everything in a stack would cause less problems than things spread out, but apparently not the case. So what did we learn? You need a crazy amount of scenery in your park in order to make it have a drastic impact on the game's performance. Scenery is something that I never really bother with in any of my parks, yet I still get craptastic performance when I'm done with them. So, on to the next test, flat rides. So for this test, things are pretty simple. Place down all the flat rides I have, set them all to testing so they're constantly moving, and then see how quickly the game catches on fire. Here are the results. Alright, that is every single flat ride in the game with some of the DLCs, not all of them, but most of them. And just staring at this mess, we're at 90 frames. That's down from 130, which is the standard. Looking at it moving back and forth, 70. Whoop, 39 with the autosave. Thank you, autosave. But again, this is one of those things where the more you get in here, the worse the frame rate gets. Again, it's at around 60. Depending on where exactly you are, the lowest I saw was high 50s, but for the most part, it's mid 60s. That's 50 flat rides all moving at the same exact time, and again, still above the 60 FPS mark while moving through them. I place a lot of flat rides down in my parks, but I'm pretty sure I've never had a park that's had every single one. With that being said, we're moving on to roller coasters. This test is going to be very similar to the flat ride test, where I'm just going to be placing coasters, pre-made ones, so they're exciting, they're fun, they're not my crappy, boring coasters, and we're going to see how many we can place before the game starts to melt. I know for a fact that the more supports a coaster has, the more it impacts performance. Wooden coasters do a number on frame rate, but surely if you have just one in your park, it's not that bad, right? And what about all the other coasters? Are they just as bad? How many coasters can you have in the park before things start to get ugly? And there you have it. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 roller coasters here. Staring at them all from back here, we're in the 100s with FPS. And if you come down close to them, we drop all the way down. We're at low 60s right now around this one coaster. Around this coaster, low 60s. You come over to these smaller coasters, it improves to mid 70s. It's actually 80s. But that's interesting. You build one coaster with a crazy amount of supports and it's all over. Kiss your frame rate goodbye. Now, I'm going to add a few more coasters just to see how it affects things overall. Oh my god. 50s, just staring at this thing alone. And now we're in the low 50s. That is something else. One wooden coaster destroys frame rate that badly. Roller coasters butcher the game. We're at 60 FPS moving around. This is probably where I'd stop building coasters if I want to keep 60 frames. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 roller coasters. 7 big roller coasters, or 6 big, 1 small. But that's surprising. The fact that we were able to have 50 something flat rides, 40,000 trees, and it got nowhere near as bad as these supports. I am blown away by how much these supports just annihilate everything. There's one more thing to test here. What if we get rid of the supports? It didn't bring all the frame rate back. We're at 70, mid-70s moving around. 70s, going through all the spaghetti. 60s. Wow. So even without the supports, we're at 115 looking at this mess instead of 130. That's also really interesting. Yeah, frame rate or supports really did cause problems here, but coasters themselves, even without supports, are still very, very intensive when it comes to FPS. Moving around this, we're at mid-70s, high 60s. So yeah, supports made a difference, but coasters in general, even without supports, still butcher the frame rate. Which makes total sense because in literally every single one of my parks, I add as many coasters as possible, and the game always implodes halfway through the series. And that just makes sense. And there you have it. Coasters are the guilty party. Even without supports, 7 coasters had the same impact as 50 flat rides or 40,000 scenery pieces. I think the most interesting thing about that is how flat rides have way more moving parts. Yet the coasters just completely killed frame rate. And you would also think, a coaster is, okay, say you have a big coaster, it takes up a decent amount of room in the park. But really, all you have is this little coaster going around this thin piece of object with thin pieces of objects connecting to that track. So, how is that different than a billion cubes? There's more stuff on the screen if you have 40,000 cubes than that coaster. And that's what I don't understand. Even without the supports, the cubes worked better than the coaster, yet there's more object to that cube than the coaster. Unless coasters, because they're a ride, they just function different than a scenery piece, even if that piece of ride isn't technically moving. I don't know the logistics behind it, but I'm assuming it has something to do with that. Like I said at the start, I'm not an expert, but coasters. I was smart enough to figure out that coasters kill frame rate. Now you might be saying, what about the guests? I tried testing the guests, but I couldn't really make sense of anything that was happening. Sometimes very little guests caused a big change, and other times they didn't. Zooming in and out gave different results. Everything was just kind of random. In my last park, I had a 2,000 guest limit and saw no change in the frame rate when I kicked all 2,000 people out. So do guests impact frame rate? I'd say yes, but not nearly to the point that coasters do. As the park gets bigger and lags more from the rides, you're gonna get more guests. So it may seem like the guests are the biggest factor to causing lag, when personally, I don't think that's it. So what has all this told us? Scenery
flat rides, and guests will cause the game to lag, but you need an awful lot of all three to get to that point. Roller coasters, on the other hand, will cause performance issues way sooner than you would think, even without supports. This doesn't mean you can make a park with 50 flat rides and 40,000 scenery pieces and have the game run perfectly smooth. You have to take some from each category and kind of balance it out on what you want to have in that park. Just be careful not to overdo it on the coasters. For me, seaming coasters is what the majority of the people that watch my videos come for. I'll probably still add way too many to my parks, and we're just gonna end up with lag by the end of the series again. With that being said, thank you all for watching this video. This whole process was completely different from how I usually make my videos. Usually, I boot up the game, hit record, talk for 30 minutes while playing the game, end it. But this was, I went into the game, I did a bunch of stuff, recording and taking notes, and then making a script afterwards that goes with the video and doing voiceovers. So, this was a new experience for me. Newer experience. I kind of did the same with, some other videos like the whole which is the best ride in Planet Coaster, but not to this extent. And honestly, I think I liked how this turned out. It was different, it was fun, I learned some stuff, I was reassured of some stuff, and with this information, with the next series hopefully things will run smoother. I can judge the size of the park, so I won't make a crazy big park like Pancake Park was, and yeah, things should hopefully go smoother with that series because of this one video. Anyway, thanks again for watching. Leave a like and share the video if you enjoyed, they help out a lot. Subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll see you next time.